Hey, what's going on, everybody? Justin here, and in this video I want to share the 7.5 books or so that I've read so far this year on medieval history or the Middle Ages. Mostly of this was done for Historathon Quarter 2. For those who don't know, Historathon is a year-long reading event that's hosted by a bunch of really cool booktubers. I'll leave a link down below for that. But Quarter 2 was April through June, and that's all about the years 500 to 1500. So a lot of kind of medieval, Middle Ages stuff going on during that time period for sure. And I've been doing my best of videos as well. I've done like the science and ancient history and modern history and stuff like that. I'm not sure. Let me know in the comments down below if you want me to do a best of with kind of like the medieval period as well. Wasn't sure whether to do it right after this one. This one I'm just gonna go in alphabetical order. Just kind of do little brief summaries and stuff since I'm listing all of them. But yeah, like I said, if you want to hear my best of or my favorites, let me know in the comments below. I wasn't sure whether to do two medieval ones like back to back quite like that. But yeah, let's just go ahead and get started. So like I said, this is going to be in alphabetical order. So the first one is one, I think last time I mentioned it a couple days ago, it was like one I was almost DNFing. It's Living by the Sword, Weapons of Material Culture in France and Britain 600 to 1600 by Kristen Newshell. And I said I'd finish out the chapter, and I went a couple pages into chapter, I think it's 3, I believe. Granted, like each chapter is like 30 pages and like a short book or something like this. So, they're quite big for like, you know, the size of the book and whatever. But I might actually keep going with it. Chapter 3 definitely seems to be changing tone quite a bit. Whereas chapters 1 and 2 were very vague and abstract on like what do swords mean, and like, you know, what is the concept of like swords throughout time. It was very odd. It was just a very odd. You kind of start off with like very like concrete, you know, here's just a bunch of like inventories of like, you know, famous aristocrats and stuff, and here's like how they like listed their swords and what can we like learn from that. And then it kind of just went into like, yeah, like the theory of forms almost regarding like swords and the ideal like in the Middle Ages and stuff. And it just kind of got really like, I don't know, PhD thesis I guess. But like I said, chapter 3 is picked up a little bit, so I've like officially not DNF'd it. I might just keep going with it. So anyways, be on the lookout for this at some point in the future. Next up, we got Medieval Maritime Warfare by Charles Stanton. And don't let this book fool you. I've mentioned this before, like when I was talking about some of like the bigger books and everything. This book, even though it's only like 300 pages of text, like the gutters and margin and font are like so tiny. There's almost like twice as many words as normal on like these pages. So I really felt like this was a 500 page book, even though it's only like it's a 280 or 288, something like that. As far as like actual like reading material besides the notes. But I learned a ton. I don't know if I'd like recommend it for the faint of heart per se, because it's a slog in the sense you learn a lot, but it's just fact after fact after fact after figure after campaign after technology. It's just super fast. I really did enjoy how the book, at first I was skeptical. He comes right out and says that he's like, I'm going to divide medieval maritime naval warfare in half. I'm going to do the Mediterranean in the first half, and I'm going to do the North Sea stuff in the second half, and that's just like how it's going to be. So it's chronological roughly in those two halves, but they're just basically almost like two. You could almost have like two separate books on them per se and just combine them to make this one. I felt like I did learn a ton though. Like medieval naval anything, I was pretty much, I didn't know anything about it except maybe like the siege of like Constantinople and stuff. Other than that, like there wasn't really just anything there, so it's filled in tons of gaps for sure. So I was sent this by Pen and Sword a long time ago, so I will be doing a full kind of like big book review on that one. Oh man, I should probably check my list to make sure I'm not going out of order. Let's see. Okay. Number 3 is Ravenna. See, I was checking because R is already book 3 out of 8, which makes feels like it's like I don't know, like not correct, I suppose. But anyways, it's Judith Herron's Ravenna, capital of Empire, crucible of Europe. I do have a full book review of this one if you're interested. This was just a wonderful history of the city of Ravenna. For those who don't know, Ravenna actually was the capital of the Western Roman Empire and was kind of like the major cultural hub for the last like 100 years or so. You know, dealing maybe from around 350 to the kind of the fall. Even after, you know, when the Goths sort of take over, and then eventually the, who am I thinking? The Lombards eventually. You know, Ravenna is really kind of the cultural capital of that part of the Mediterranean world, as opposed to like Constantinople in the east and everything. Just really fun. And this one, like I mentioned it in my ancient history review or book list that I did, this one kind of straddles the line between, is it ancient history or is it early medieval history? It's basically a pure book on late antiquity. Like I said, it covers the years roughly 350-ish, around 400, something like that, all the way to like 800. So you got like kind of the very tail end of the classical world, but you're kind of like in that vibe for the most part. But then you're kind of going all the way up to like the era of like Charlemagne and everything, which is clearly like the early Middle Ages. So it's definitely just like a nice book on early or just late antiquity, I should say. So it kind of covers both grounds. But like I said, it's just fun learning about a city. Like I've, you know, from my other readings on Rome and everything, you kind of get little tidbits and everything, but you don't realize quite how important, you know, Ravenna was in this kind of like, you know, the Dark Ages and everything. So it was just really fun learning about it from that lens. Next up is a very short introduction, one of the Oxford very short introductions that I talk about quite a bit. This one's Christopher Tyerman's The Crusades, and I wanted to read this one before I picked up if I wanted to actually go through with God's War, which I've had for like 10 years or something like that. Just have never gotten around to that one, but it's by the same author. And I'm like, you know, if I read this one first, maybe I'll get a feel of the writing style. And I didn't really like this one a whole lot, to be honest. I feel like this one's definitely on the lower end of the Oxford very short introductions. Like only the first chapter is really dealing with the Crusades as like kind of like a historical thing. All the other chapters are just kind of like interpreting it with different lenses, and kind of comparing it to like current like trends and ideologies and things like that. So not a whole lot on the Crusades proper per se, if that makes sense. And there are times and places for a lot of those things, so I don't know if like the Oxford very short introduction, like, you know, it's only 100 pages or whatever, it's quite the right way to do it. So next up I have a couple, let's see, like Kindle and audio books and stuff, so I don't have physical copies, but if you've made it this far, definitely check out my Etsy shop where I sell different things like that, everything like, you know, I got some nature stuff, I don't know, different history and philosophy quotes and everything like this. This is Saper Aude, which is Dare to Know, just like a motto of the enlightenment and everything, which I just really enjoy. From that like buddy read that I've been doing with a few other people as well. Yeah, but like I said, that's just the best way to support the channel if you want to do so. But let's just keep going. So number 5, we have The Perfect Sword, Forging the Dark Ages by Paul Gething. And this is like a totally different way to approach swords than the Living by the Sword book that I recently just talked about. This one is all about an archaeological site in the UK where they actually uncovered a sword. I believe it was like in the 60s or 70s, and it was kind of like lost in a way until like around like 2000 for whatever reason, and it's called the Brunabag sword. But the author has done a bunch of like research, has talked to different experts and everything like on this sword, and it was just going through all the different, I guess, technologies and advancements and everything needed for this Anglo-Saxon sword to come into fruition, to be created and everything. And it's argued that this is like one of the, for the early Middle Ages, like, you know, during the Dark Ages and everything, this is like one of the highest quality swords like anyone's like ever uncovered. And you kind of, what's interesting is you kind of learn about the life and times of the era. You know, who would this sword be for? Probably some noble, maybe a, you know, an Anglo-Saxon warlord or king or something like that. But you learn all the different techniques to like pattern weld it, everything like that. Like, what did they have at that time period compared to like today's? Like, you know, how did they actually go about making the sword? But you get all kinds of different like little historical tidbits thrown in all the time. I remember learning about like Irish monks using like tidal power to do certain things like in their monasteries and everything. And I never even like considered stuff like that. So I don't know. I just found it really interesting in kind of the context of, you know, taking this sword and doing like a life and times of like an object rather than like a person, if that makes sense. So I don't know, I just found that one really interesting. Number 6, we have The White Ship by Charles Spencer, Conquest, Anarchy, and the Wrecking of Henry the First Dream. So this is kind of what it says on the tin right there. It's all about the White Ship incident, which is actually smack dab in the middle of the book. There's kind of like a prologue that includes it too. But as far as the historical narrative, you kind of have the reign of Henry the First in around, you know, around 1100 or so, leading up to the White Ship incident, which is when half like the royal family, a bunch of aristocrats and other people died as they were crossing the channel when a ship, the White Ship, struck a rock as they were crossing the channel in the middle of the night, and pretty much everyone drowned except one guy and everything. And that kind of screws everything up. But the reason I'm really interested in it is the second half. Essentially, since William Adelin died, Henry I's daughter, Matilda, becomes the heir apparent, sort of, and he makes like all the nobles, swear like, Matilda's gonna like take over when I die and everything. And for those who've been following my channel for a while know, like, Matilda's probably my favorite medieval, like, royal figure kind of person and everything. And eventually, essentially, her cousin actually seizes the throne when Henry dies, and all the, the bourgeoisie and the aristocrats kind of renege on their promise to Matilda, and then the anarchy happens because Matilda crosses the channel and says, no, like, this is like mine by right, and you guys like all know this and everything. And then there's like a civil war, so that's where the anarchy part comes in. Just found it was a really good kind of historical like set piece. I don't know a whole lot of like kind of the generation before Matilda, which is kind of William the Conqueror and his children, like Henry I and everything, and kind of does a good job like leading up to like how did Henry actually become king, as opposed to like some of his other brothers and everything that were kind of slated for a royalty, or I guess the kingship before him and everything. So I did find it filled in a lot of gaps in my knowledge. And then lastly was another, I think this one was a Kindle book. I guess it was a digital ebook on Everand, but Whose Middle Ages? Teachable Moments for an Ill-Used Past. And this is a bunch of just essays by different authors, and I think there's like 5 or 6 like editors and everything. And what this book does is it takes a bunch of issues from the Middle Ages, and we're talking about like race issues, like there's the whole thing like in modern media, there were no like Asian people, there were no black people in Europe and stuff like that, and kind of actually doing essays kind of trying to like recorrect like some of the stuff. You kind of learn some of them aren't like as like pressing like that. Some of them are like, you always see like the snails like fighting knights and stuff in medieval manuscripts, and there's an essay on why is that like happening, what does that really mean, and stuff like that. So I found some of them were a lot more interesting than others. A few of the arguments I felt were kind of really overblown per se. Just for example, some on trade, they're trying to talk about how like trade is important, obviously, and it was far flung, which it was. But like one of the examples they use is like the narwhal ivory, I believe it was, and how like just absolutely critical it was. And I it was important, but I don't know if like the narwhal tusk ivory trade was absolutely imperative to the concept of the Middle Ages and stuff. But like I said, obviously with essay collections you kind of get right a lot of the hit or miss kind of thing kind of going on there for sure. And then lastly, we have a classic. We have Women in the Middle Ages by Francis and Joseph Guise, The Lives of Real Women in a Vibrant Age of Transition. So they are probably the most famous for their life trilogy, which is Life in a Medieval Village, Castle, and City. And I think Life in a Medieval City is probably my favorite work of social history, at least on the Middle Ages, probably as well as like social histories that I've read. Obviously, this one is like a social history of women in the Middle Ages. What I enjoyed about this one is the first half is more of a like kind of overview of kind of the different changes that women sort of went through over, this is a huge time span of about 1,000 years, from like, kind of the, the barbarian dark ages all the way through, the late chivalric Middle Ages and everything. And the first half, like I said, is kind of detailing a lot of kind of the overview, I guess, narrative, if that makes sense. Whereas the second half actually profiles like about 7 or 8 different medieval women from different time periods in the Middle Ages, and kind of using them as a way to kind of explain a lot of the examples that they kind of talked about earlier in the book. But like one of the ones that I really enjoyed randomly was Margherita d'Attini, who's like a Venetian like merchant, or is she Florentine? Yeah, Florentine, I think. Merchant's wife, but they profile like her correspondence with her husband, and she actually works like, she's a pretty rare example where she basically forced people to teach her how to like read and write, so she could do it on her own without needing like a secretary or someone else to like transcribe or read things for her or write for her and everything, so she could actually have privacy and everything. But it was just showing how she like ran like a merchant household, like a big merchant household, did some of the business stuff, gave her like husband like a different advice and everything like that. But I just found it really interesting. I don't know if it's quite as good as the Life trilogy that I had mentioned earlier, but I'm really glad I read it. I feel like I've learned a lot, and like I said, I haven't read, this is I think their fourth book that I've read now, fourth or fifth, and they haven't missed yet, like, badly, so definitely encourage you guys to, even though they're a little bit older, I feel like they still hold up quite well. So there you have it. Those are the 8 books, or I guess 7.5, because I haven't finished the Living by the Sword yet now, but I think I'll continue going with it. Those are the 8 books that I've been going with so far this year on, you know, the Middle Ages and the medieval period. Let me know if you want to hear kind of like my top 3 or 4 out of these ones. Like I said, I don't know. It felt kind of weird maybe if it was like this close together. I don't know. Though I suppose if people like don't see this one but see the other one. Anyways, let me know what your favorite medieval book ever is. I'm always on the lookout for great recommendations, and I get a lot of good medieval ones. I feel like medieval ones are kind of the ones for people that don't read a lot of history. Like, a lot of people are attracted to the Middle Ages for whatever reason, just because, you know, like I said, it's just a cool time period for people to like read about and everything. So yeah, let me know what your favorite book dealing with like the historical medieval world is, and I will definitely be sure to at least check it out. And whether you're reading books on the Middle Ages or not, always remember, read victoriously.